The alarm on my wrist screamed before I even reached the gate, and my first thought was that someone was going to lose an arm today. I am a xenoveterinarian. I have spent 41 cycles treating creatures that could end my life with a single careless movement. I have set the broken wing bones of a sky hunter twice my size. I have pulled a live parasite out of a child's stomach while the child laughed at me for making a face. I do not panic. Panic is a luxury my profession does not allow. That belief lasted exactly as long as it took me to see what was waiting for me at the enclosure gate. The human delegation had arrived only 3 days earlier. They called themselves researchers, though I suspected half of them were simply curious about our world and had found the fastest way to get here. Among them was a young man named Ellis, junior liaison, all long limbs and quick questions, who had spent his first 2 days asking our keepers if he could get closer to the animals, just for a look. I had warned him. I remember warning him specifically about the kelvash, our largest ground predator, 6 legs and a jaw built to crush stone. I remember telling him, in careful, simple words, that the enclosure fencing was a boundary, not a suggestion. He must have leaned too far in, or reached too far in. I never got the full story, because by the time I arrived, the story had already happened, and all that remained was the aftermath. Ellis was sitting on an overturned feed crate near the gate, his sleeve torn open, blood running steadily down his forearm, and dripping in a slow, even rhythm off the tips of 2 fingers. He was calmly wrapping a strip of tape around the injury, humming something under his breath, as though he were fixing a loose bootlace, and not a wound that had opened deep enough for me to see the pale gleam of bone underneath. I stopped walking. My throat sacs tightened. For 1 long second I could not make my legs move forward. "Do not move," I finally managed, my voice coming out flatter and harder than I intended. "Do not move, and do not wrap that any tighter, until I have looked at it properly." Ellis glanced up at me, mildly surprised, as if he had forgotten I existed. "Oh hey Doc. Yeah, he got me pretty good." He said this the way someone might mention that it had started raining. "He got you." "Good," I repeated, my voice cracking slightly on the word. "Your bone is visible. There is a bone visible in your arm right now, Ellis." "Yeah, that's just how deep it went. It's fine though. Missed anything important." He held the arm out toward me, turning it slightly under the light, showing it off, the way one might show off a scratch on a new pair of boots rather than a bite that could have taken a limb clean off one of my own species. "See? It didn't even get the tendons. This is basically nothing." Nothing. I was already pulling open my medical kit, already reaching for trauma foam, already trying to calculate his blood volume against numbers I did not fully trust, because I had never treated a human before, and every reference chart I owned felt suddenly, uselessly incomplete. "There is a hole in your arm." I fell off a bike once when I was 9 and split my chin open on the pavement. "Bled way more than this." He said it lightly, almost cheerfully, like he was proud of the memory. "This is nothing compared to that." I did not know what a bike was. In that moment, I did not want to know. I was afraid that whatever it turned out to be, it would only make me more frightened of this species, not less. I pressed the trauma foam into the wound. Ellis exhaled softly through his nose, the same small sound one of my own kind might make at a drink that was slightly too hot to swallow comfortably. That was his entire reaction to an injury that, by every standard I understood, should have put him flat on the ground and unconscious from shock. I checked the borrowed human biomonitor with hands that I will admit were not entirely steady. "Your pulse," I said slowly, "is 68. "Yeah, that sounds about right for me. That is a resting pulse. You are bleeding from an open wound, and your body is behaving as though you are seated comfortably at a meal." He shrugged with the shoulder that was not currently missing a piece of itself. "I mean, it hurts. I'm not saying it doesn't hurt, but it's not a big thing, you know? You clean it, you close it up, you don't lift anything heavy with that arm for a couple of weeks, and it's done. I've seen people get worse falling down stairs." "What is stairs?" "You really don't want the mental picture, Doc." I did the closing work myself, rather than trust it to our automated surgical unit, which was still calibrating for human tissue, and which I did not fully trust to guess correctly on its very first patient. Ellis talked through the entire procedure. He asked about the kelvash's jaw structure. He asked whether the fencing design needed review. He asked, at one point, whether we had anything to eat nearby, because apparently, near injury did not affect his appetite either. He did not flinch once, not even when I closed the deepest layer of tissue. I have sedated far larger creatures for procedures far less invasive than the one I performed, fully conscious, on this calm, talkative human who ate a ration bar with his uninjured hand between sentences. When I finished, he flexed his fingers, winced once, the first honest sign of discomfort I had gotten out of him in the entire encounter, and said, "Thanks, Doc. Hey, is he going to be all right? The big fellow. I don't want him getting in trouble for this. He was just doing what predators do." I stared at him for a long moment, unable to form a reply. He was worried about the animal's well-being, not his own. "He is fine," I said finally, my voice still unsteady. "He is completely fine. He is, in fact, having a rather ordinary day." "Good instincts on him, then." Ellis nodded approvingly, as though grading the creature that had nearly cost him his arm. "You should be proud of him." I filed that encounter away as an anomaly, a single strange human with an unusually high tolerance for discomfort. I told myself the rest of the delegation would react more like reasonable beings when something similar happened to them. I was wrong within the same week. The second incident involved a woman named Priya, one of the delegation's engineers, who had been helping our keepers repair a section of fencing near the aviary. A large flying creature we call a stormhawk, easily the size of a grown adult with wings that could knock a smaller person off their feet, had taken exception to her presence and struck her across the shoulder with one wing during a moment of alarm. I heard about it from a keeper who arrived breathless at my office, telling me the human woman had been struck hard enough to be thrown sideways into a support post. I ran. I do not run often. My joints are not built for it, and I regretted the decision within the first few steps. But I ran anyway, because a blow like that, from a stormhawk to one of our own kind, would have meant a shattered shoulder and possibly worse. I arrived to find Priya sitting up against the very post she had apparently collided with, rubbing her shoulder with one hand and laughing quietly with the keeper beside her. "You are laughing," I said, somewhat breathless from the run, staring at her in disbelief. Sorry. She waved a hand at me, still smiling. "It's just, your keeper here looked more scared than I felt. I got knocked into a post, that's all. Bit of a bruise coming, probably. You were struck by a stormhawk. Its wingspan alone carries enough force to break bone. Yeah, it definitely hurt. I'm not saying it didn't hurt, but I'm not broken, Doc. Look." She rolled her shoulder in a slow circle, wincing slightly, but completing the motion without apparent difficulty. "See? Still works. This is nothing." I examined her regardless, gently pressing along the joint and the surrounding tissue, watching her face for any sign that the calm exterior was hiding something worse underneath. I found bruising, deep and already darkening, the kind that would have made one of my own kind stay motionless for days. Priya sat through the examination, chatting about the fence repair schedule, as though her shoulder were an afterthought to the actual work at hand. "This will bruise badly," I told her. "You should rest it." Sure. I'll wrap it up and keep it easy for a few days." She said this the way one might agree to remember to water a plant. Casual. Already thinking about something else. Honestly, this is nothing compared to when I broke my wrist skating. That one actually hurt. What is skating? Another thing you don't want to know about, Doc. I began to notice a pattern. Every human I treated described their own injuries the same way. Nothing. Not a big deal. I've had worse. Each time, the injury itself was, by every standard I understood, significant. Each time, the human wearing it treated it as barely worth mentioning, and each time, they seemed more concerned about the animal, the equipment, or the schedule than about themselves. I began to wonder if this species simply could not feel harm the way the rest of us did. It was an unsettling thought. A being that does not register pain properly is a being that does not know when to stop, when to retreat, when to protect itself. I found myself watching the humans more carefully after that, not out of professional curiosity anymore, but out of something closer to concern. That concern reached its peak on the day the containment fence failed. It happened during a routine feeding cycle. A support strut on the northern enclosure, the one holding our largest Kelvash, corroded faster than our maintenance schedule accounted for, and gave way without warning. I was 2 enclosures over when I heard the sound of metal folding and the low, rolling growl that meant a very large animal had just discovered it was no longer contained. By the time I reached the open gap in the fence, 3 of our keepers were already backing away, and a small group of humans, Ellis among them, had been caught on the wrong side of the breach, closer to the loose animal than any of my own staff. I remember thinking, with total clarity, that I was about to watch someone die. The Kelvash lowered its head, tasting the air, focused entirely on the nearest moving figure, which happened to be a human named Callum, one of the delegation's younger members, who froze in place the way prey often does when it senses it has been noticed. What happened next took less time to occur than it has taken me to describe it. Ellis stepped forward, not back. He picked up a length of loose fencing pipe from the ground beside him and struck it hard against the metal post nearest to him. Once, twice, a sharp ringing sound that cut through the growling and made the Kelvash's head snap toward the new noise instead of toward Callum. Hey, big guy, over here." Ellis's voice was loud, steady, almost conversational, as though he were calling a pet rather than redirecting an apex predator. He struck the pipe against the post again. The Kelvash's attention shifted fully onto him. I could not move. I could not speak. Every instinct in my body told me this would end with Ellis on the ground, and I was already reaching for my medical kit with hands that were shaking too badly to be useful. The Kelvash lunged. Ellis stepped sideways, not quite fast enough, and the animal's shoulder caught him across the side, throwing him against the very fence post he had just been ringing like a bell. He hit the ground hard, rolled once, and came up on one knee, breathing heavily, one arm pressed against his ribs. By then our containment team had arrived with the proper equipment, and the animal was guided back through the breach and secured within moments, the entire crisis resolving faster than my own pulse could settle. I reached Ellis before anyone else did. He was still on one knee, breathing hard, his face tight with the first genuine expression of discomfort I had seen from any human since their arrival. "Do not move," I said again, hearing the same words leave my mouth as the very first day, except this time, my voice was not flat. It was shaking. "I'm all right, Doc." He tried to stand and immediately thought better of it, sitting back down with a small grunt. "Just knocked the wind out of me, and maybe a rib. Feels bruised. Not broken, I think." I checked him anyway, running my hands carefully along his side, feeling for the telltale give of a fracture beneath the skin. I found tenderness, swelling, the beginnings of a deep bruise that would spread across most of his side by evening, but no break. "You could have died," I said, and I heard my own voice crack on the last word. "You stepped toward a Kelvash instead of away from it." Callum was frozen. Someone had to move its attention. Ellis said this simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world, as though risking his own body to redirect an apex predator away from a colleague required no thought at all. Wasn't going to just stand there and watch. "You could have been killed," I said again, because I did not know how else to make him understand the weight of what he had just done. "Yeah, well." He winced as I helped him to his feet, one arm still pressed to his side. "Wasn't though, so it's fine. That's kind of how it works, isn't it? You worry about the maybe after the maybe doesn't happen." I had no answer for that. I still do not have a proper answer for that. I treated his ribs myself that evening, wrapping the bruising carefully, watching his breathing for any sign of deeper damage. He talked the entire time, asking about the Kelvash's recovery, asking whether the fence repair would hold this time, asking whether Callum was doing all right after the fright of it all. Not once did he ask about himself beyond confirming that nothing was broken. Word of the incident spread quickly through both our staff and the human delegation. I expected the humans to be shaken by how close it had come. Instead, I found several of them gathered near the mess hall that evening, retelling the story to each other with something that sounded uncomfortably close to amusement, comparing it to other close moments they had lived through, other injuries, other times something large and dangerous had come close and failed to finish the job. "You should have seen the fence tear," one of them said, laughing. "Ellis just start ringing that pipe like a dinner bell." "He does this," another one added, shaking her head fondly. Remember the thing with the transport door back home? Man's got no sense of self-preservation. I sat quietly at the edge of that gathering, listening, trying to understand a species that treated brushes with serious harm as material for a good story, rather than a memory to be avoided. I had spent 41 cycles learning to keep dangerous creatures calm and contained. I had never once considered that the greater challenge might be understanding a species that did not seem to fear the danger in the first place. Priya found me there, still sitting quietly, and settled onto the bench beside me with her shoulder still wrapped from days earlier. "You look troubled, Doc," she said. "I do not understand your people," I admitted. It felt strange to say out loud, but it also felt honest, and honesty seemed appropriate given everything I had witnessed that week. "You are injured constantly. You treat it as nothing. You step toward danger instead of away from it. I do not know how to keep you safe if you will not help me keep yourselves safe." Priya considered this for a moment, turning her cup slowly in her hands. "I don't think it's that we don't feel it," she said finally. "It hurts. Believe me, it hurts. I think it's just, we've all had worse, at some point, from something. Falling off things as kids, sports, bad luck. You learn pretty quick that most hurts pass, and the ones that don't, you deal with when they come. Doesn't mean much to just sit around being afraid of the next one before it happens." "That seems like a difficult way to live." "Maybe," she shrugged, the same easy motion I had seen from every human I had treated that week. "But it also means, when something like Callum freezing up happens, somebody like Ellis doesn't stop to think about the maybe. He just moves. That's kind of the whole point, I guess. Worry costs you the moment you need most." I thought about that for a long while after she left. I thought about Ellis stepping toward the Kelvash instead of away. I thought about him worrying over the animal's future rather than his own arm on that very first day. I thought about all of them, treating pain as an old familiar visitor rather than an unwelcome stranger. I do not know what will happen the day a human under my care is truly, seriously harmed, in a way that cannot be waved away with a shrug and a joke about worse falls in childhood. I am not certain our facility carries enough supplies for that day. I am not certain I am prepared for what that day will ask of me. But I have decided something. Sitting there long after the gathering had ended, and the enclosure lights had dimmed for the evening. Whatever waits for this species out among the stars, whatever creature or danger imagines it, has found easy prey in these soft, talkative, endlessly curious beings, has made a serious miscalculation. They do not run from the maybe. They walk toward it, ringing a pipe against a post, calling out to the very thing that could end them, simply because someone else needed the danger's attention more than they did. And when it is over, when the wound is closed and the bruise begins to fade, they will tell you, without a trace of doubt in their voice, that it was nothing. Really,